Abusive babysitter. Pushed paralyzed girl off the road. But the dog's actions shocked the entire town. It all started when a young paralyzed woman thought she was finally getting a new caregiver who would help her feel safe again. But on a quiet mountain road, everything changed. One sudden shove, one wheelchair flying off the edge, and a helpless girl left to die. But what the babysitter didn't know was that the girl wasn't alone. Her loyal dog sensed something was wrong, running, tracking, fighting to reach her, and what he uncovered next would shake their entire town to its core. Because this wasn't just an accident. This wasn't just a bad caregiver. There was something darker hiding behind that smile, something no one wanted to believe. If a dog uncovered the truth, what else has been hiding in the shadows? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Maren Holt's mountain home in Kingsford, Colorado, casting long shadows across her hardwood floors. She guided her wheelchair towards the kitchen, where Atlas, her loyal German shepherd, kept pace beside her. His graying muzzle and watchful eyes followed her every move, a constant guardian even in these quiet moments. "Just a regular Wednesday, buddy," Maren said softly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. Atlas leaned into her touch, his tail wagging slowly. The routine they'd built over the past 3 years since her accident felt like a carefully constructed shelter, predictable, safe, if sometimes lonely. The kitchen counter had been modified to accommodate her wheelchair, allowing her to reach the coffee maker and most used items. Still, there were days when the simplest tasks reminded her of everything she'd lost. Before the accident, she'd been an avid hiker and rock climber. Now, her world had shrunk to the confines of her wheelchair-accessible home and the occasional outing with help from her care workers. A knock at the door made Atlas's ears perk up. Through the window, Maren spotted Rowan Pike's familiar truck in her driveway. The local mechanic had become a steady presence in her life, dropping by to check on her several times a week. His reliability was as constant as the mountains that surrounded their small town. "Come in, Rowan," she called out, knowing he had a spare key for emergencies. The door opened, and Rowan's broad-shouldered frame filled the doorway. He wore his usual work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, grease stains telling the story of his day at the garage. "Thought I'd stop by before heading home," he said, his warm eyes crinkling at the corners. "Brought you some of Mrs. Henderson's famous apple pie from the diner." Atlas trotted over to greet him, receiving a hearty pat on the head. The dog's easy acceptance of Rowan had been one of the first signs that told Maren she could trust him. After her accident, trust hadn't come easily. "You're spoiling me," Maren said, but accepted the pie with a grateful smile. "How's business?" "Steady as always. Tourist season's picking up. Lots of folks with overheated engines trying to climb these mountains." He leaned against the counter, comfortable in her space in a way that never felt intrusive. "How are things with the agency? Heard they're sending someone new tomorrow?" Maren nodded, her copper-brown hair falling forward as she set the pie on the counter. "Yeah, my regular care worker's on maternity leave. The agency's sending someone named Ember Lane. Want me to stop by? Make sure everything's okay?" The offer warmed her heart, but Maren shook her head. "I'll be fine. Atlas is better than any security system." She glanced at her faithful companion, who had settled back at her side. The next morning arrived with a crisp mountain breeze and the promise of change. At precisely 9 o'clock, a silver sedan pulled into Maren's driveway. Atlas, usually relaxed during care worker visits, stood alert by Maren's wheelchair, his posture unusually rigid. Ember Lane emerged from the car like a character stepping out of a magazine spread, every hair in place, her pale eyes sharp and assessing behind a pleasant smile. She wore simple scrubs, but something about her appearance seemed almost too perfect, too controlled. "Good morning, Ms. Holt," Ember said, her voice measured and professional. "I'm Ember Lane from Mountain Care Services." She extended her hand, and Marin noticed how cold her grip felt despite the warm day. As Ember moved through the house, explaining her experience and qualifications, Atlas's behavior grew increasingly concerning. The usually friendly dog kept his distance, a low growl rumbling in his chest when Ember passed too close. "Atlas," Marin said sharply, surprised by his reaction. In all their years together, through countless visitors and care workers, she'd never seen him respond this way to anyone. "Oh, don't worry about it," Ember said smoothly. "Some animals take time to adjust to new people. I'm sure we'll be great friends soon." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she gazed at Atlas. Throughout the morning, Ember demonstrated textbook-perfect care techniques. She helped Marin with her exercises, prepared lunch, and organized her medications with mechanical efficiency. Agency Director Wallace Brent had praised Ember's references and experience during their phone call the previous week, and Marin could see why. Everything was done precisely right, almost too right. By afternoon, Marin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything she could point to specifically. Ember's responses were always appropriate, her actions always correct, but there was an artificiality to it all, like watching someone perform a role they'd studied but didn't quite understand. When Rowan stopped by later that evening after Ember had left, Atlas finally relaxed. The dog had spent the entire day on edge, maintaining a protective position between Marin and her new caregiver. "So how'd it go?" Rowan asked, noticing the tension in Marin's shoulders. "I don't know," Marin admitted, running her fingers through her hair. "She's perfectly qualified. Everyone at the agency loves her, but something feels wrong. And Atlas..." She looked at her dog, who was now peacefully dozing at her feet. "He's never acted like that before." Rowan's expression grew serious. "Atlas has good instincts. That's why he was such a good search and rescue dog. If something doesn't feel right..." "I can't exactly tell the agency my dog doesn't like her," Marin said with a weak laugh. "They'd think I was being ridiculous." "Then we'll keep an eye on things," Rowan promised, his steady presence offering comfort. "I'll drop by more often while she's here, and you've got Atlas. He won't let anything happen to you." As darkness settled over the mountains, Marin sat by her window, watching the stars emerge. Atlas rested his head on her lap, his warm weight anchoring her. She scratched behind his ears, thinking about Ember's too perfect smile and the way her dog had growled, a warning she couldn't ignore but didn't yet understand. The quiet of her mountain home, usually a comfort, felt different now. Something had shifted with Ember's arrival, like the first small tremor before an avalanche. Marin had survived one life-changing accident 3 years ago. She couldn't shake the feeling that Atlas was trying to prevent another. As she prepared for bed, following the careful routine she'd developed since her paralysis, Marin thought about how her life had become a delicate balance of independence and necessary help. She'd learned to accept assistance without losing herself, to trust without becoming vulnerable. But Ember's presence had disturbed that balance, introducing an element of uncertainty that made her questioning everything. Atlas followed her through her nighttime routine, more attentive than usual. His protective behavior, rather than being reassuring, only reinforced her unease. If a highly trained former search and rescue dog, an animal who had spent years finding and helping people in danger, was this disturbed by Ember's presence, maybe Marin's intuition wasn't just paranoia. She settled into bed, Atlas taking his usual position nearby, and tried to rationalize her feelings. Ember's references were impeccable. The agency trusted her. She was efficient and capable. Yet something in those pale, calculating eyes and that too-perfect demeanor had set off warning bells that Marin couldn't silence. Tomorrow would bring another day with her new caregiver, another day of precise care delivered with mechanical perfection. As Marin drifted off to sleep, Atlas's steady breathing nearby, she couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath Ember's flawless facade, and whether she really wanted to find out. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Ember moved through Marin's home with practiced grace, her perfectly manicured hands arranging and rearranging things for efficiency. Little by little, Marin's carefully organized world began to shift. "I'm sure you had the doctor's appointment scheduled for Tuesday," Ember said one morning, her voice gentle but firm. "See? It's right here in my notes." Marin frowned, staring at her calendar. "I could have sworn it was Thursday. I always schedule medical appointments on Thursdays." "Memory can be tricky after trauma," Ember responded smoothly, placing a hand on Marin's shoulder that felt more like a weight than comfort. "That's why you have me to help keep track." These small moments of doubt multiplied. Items Marin was certain she'd left in one place would appear in another. Appointments shifted. Her medication schedule subtly changed. When she mentioned these things to Rowan during his increasingly rare visits, even he seemed unsure. "Maybe you're just tired," he suggested, though concern flickered in his eyes. "Ember does have great references." Atlas remained unconvinced. The dog's hackles rose whenever Ember entered a room, his low growls earning him banishment to the backyard more and more often. "He's becoming quite aggressive," Ember noted to the agency supervisor during a check-in. "Perhaps it would be safer to have him rehomed. For everyone's safety, of course." The suggestion sent ice through Marin's veins. "Atlas stays," she said firmly, one of the few times she directly opposed Ember. The caregiver simply smiled and nodded, but the next day, Atlas's food bowl contained barely half his usual portion. "Doctor's orders," Ember explained. "He's looking a bit heavy." The crisp mountain morning of Marin's neurology appointment dawned clear and cold. Ember helped her into the passenger seat of the silver sedan with practiced efficiency, folding the wheelchair into the trunk. As they wound their way up the mountain road, Marin watched pine trees blur past her window, trying to ignore the growing knot in her stomach. Atlas had been particularly agitated that morning, barking and whining as they left. Now, watching Ember's perfectly steady hands on the steering wheel, Marin wished she'd listened to her dog's instincts weeks ago. "Such a lovely drive," Ember commented, taking another sharp turn. The road narrowed, guardrails appearing intermittently along the steep drops. "So peaceful up here. Just us in the mountains." Marin nodded, noticing they'd passed the usual turnoff to the medical center. "I think we missed—" "Oh," Ember interrupted, frowning at the dashboard. "That's concerning. I think there might be something wrong with the tire pressure. Better safe than sorry up here." She pulled over at a scenic overlook, the car's tires crunching on gravel. "We should call Rowan," Marin suggested, her heart beginning to race. "His shop isn't far." "No need to bother him," Ember said, already, retrieving the wheelchair. "Let's get you some fresh air while I check things out." The mountain air bit at Marin's face as Ember wheeled her toward the overlook. Far below, jagged rocks dotted the steep slope, a small stream threading between them like a silver ribbon. The guardrail here was old, showing gaps of rust and wear. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" Ember's voice had changed, losing its professional warmth. She positioned the wheelchair near the edge, setting the brakes. "You know, Marin, you really should have listened to your dog." Marin's fingers gripped her armrests. "What are you? Such a smart animal," Ember continued, her tone almost conversational. "They always know, don't they? But people rarely listen." She leaned down, her breath cold against Marin's ear. "Just like no one listened about the others. Accidents happen so easily, especially to people who are already damaged." Terror froze Marin's throat as Ember's words sank in. The accident that had paralyzed her 3 years ago flashed through her mind. The unexplained brake failure, the convenient witness who never appeared again. "You're the burden they won't speak of," Ember whispered. "I'm just helping to ease it, like always." Marin opened her mouth to scream, but Ember was already moving. With one sharp push, she sent the wheelchair toward the gap in the guardrail. Time seemed to slow as Marin felt the wheels leave solid ground, her world tilting sickeningly toward the rocks below. The last thing she saw was Ember's face, watching with cold satisfaction as the wheelchair began its deadly tumble down the mountainside. Then the world became a violent blur of sky and stone, each impact stealing her breath as she plunged toward the stream below. Behind her, car doors slammed. An engine started. The sound of tires on gravel faded away, leaving only the mountain wind to witness what had happened. Atlas paced frantically in the backyard, his aging muscles tense with anxiety. The chain securing his run line jingled as he moved back and forth, nose lifted to catch any trace of Marin's scent on the wind. Something was wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong. He'd watched helplessly as that woman, the one whose scent carried the sharp edge of danger, had driven away with his person. Every instinct from his years of search and rescue training screamed at him to follow, to protect, to find. The metal clip holding his run line groaned under constant pressure. Atlas threw his weight against it again and again, his powerful shoulders straining until finally, with a sharp crack, the aged metal gave way. He burst through the gap in the fence where the boards had loosened over time, his paws hitting dirt as he took off at a full run. The German shepherd's nose led him up the winding mountain road, following the lingering traces of tire rubber and Marin's familiar scent. His graying muzzle stayed low to the ground as he tracked, ignoring the burn in his muscles. Age meant nothing when his person needed him. He passed the medical center, noting their scent trail continued upward. The path grew steeper, the air thinner, but Atlas pressed on. His training kicked in fully now, years of searching for lost hikers and accident victims guiding his movements as he quartered the road systematically. The scenic overlook's gravel crunched under his paws as he picked up a stronger trace of Marin's scent and fear. His head snapped up, scanning the area until he spotted the gap in the guardrail. Without hesitation, he began picking his way down the treacherous slope. Loose rocks clattered beneath him as he descended, using every bit of his mountain rescue experience to navigate safely. The scent of blood made his heart race faster. He barked, the sound echoing off the rocks, the same bark he'd used countless times to alert his handlers to a find. Near the bottom of the ravine, he found her. Marin lay crumpled on a narrow ledge just above the stream, the mangled wheelchair trapped in rocks nearby. Her clothes were soaked from the spray of the water, her skin pale and cold. But she was breathing. Atlas whined softly, nudging her face with his nose. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. The ledge was precarious, water constantly splashing up from below. Using all his strength and training, Atlas carefully got his body under her shoulders, beginning the painstaking process of dragging her to a wider, more stable section of the ledge. His muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to stop until she was safely away from the edge. Once she was settled, he pressed his body against hers, trying to share what warmth he could. His tongue gently cleaned a cut on her forehead as he waited for help to arrive. Miles above, Ember Lane sat in her car, carefully adjusting her expression in the rearview mirror. When it reflected exactly the right mix of concern and professional composure, she picked up her phone and dialed 911. "Emergency services?" a dispatcher answered promptly. "Yes, hello." Ember's voice wavered just enough to suggest distress while remaining clear. "I need to report an attempted suicide. I'm a home health worker, and my client, she just threw herself from the overlook on Mountain Pass Road." She took a shaky breath. The performance perfect. "I tried to stop her. She's been so depressed lately, talking about being a burden. I should have seen the signs. Please hurry." Within minutes, sirens echoed through the mountains. Sheriff Delia Krause's patrol vehicle led the response team, lights flashing as they pulled into the overlook. The sheriff took in the scene with sharp eyes, the gap in the guardrail, the obviously distraught caregiver. "Ms. Lane?" Sheriff Krause approached where Ember sat on a boulder, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Can you tell me what happened?" "We were heading to her doctor's appointment," Ember explained, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "She asked me to stop here. Said she wanted to see the view. Then she pushed herself forward before I could reach her." She covered her face. "I should have known. She's been making comments about not wanting to be a burden anymore." The sheriff made notes, her expression neutral. "We've got search and rescue coming up from Boulder. They'll find her." As if on cue, a bark echoed up from below. The sheriff's head snapped toward the sound. "Is that Atlas?" Ember said quickly. "Her dog. He must have gotten loose and followed us somehow. He's very attached to her." The rescue team worked efficiently, rappelling down to where Atlas stood guard over Marin's still form. Her skin was dangerously cold, her breathing shallow. As they secured her to a backboard, Atlas refused to leave her side, climbing back up the slope alongside the rescuers. The ambulance screamed toward Kingsford Regional Hospital, Atlas riding in the front seat after refusing to be left behind. In the emergency bay, Rowan Pike burst through the doors, his work shirt still covered in grease. "Where is she?" he demanded, eyes wild with worry. "Someone said she... That can't be right. Marin would never..." "Sir." A nurse tried to calm him. "Ms. Holt is being treated for hypothermia and multiple injuries. Are you family?" "I'm her..." he faltered. "I'm her neighbor, her friend. She wouldn't do this. I know her." Ember appeared at his elbow, her face a mask of sympathy. "Rowan, I know this is hard. You care about her so much. Maybe too much to see how much she's been struggling." The sheriff watched this interaction carefully, noting how Rowan bristled at Ember's words. "Mr. Pike, why don't we step outside? I have some questions about Ms. Holt's state of mind recently." As they walked away, Ember allowed herself a small smile. The seeds of doubt were planted. The overly attached neighbor, the dedicated caregiver, the troubled patient. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. In the treatment room, doctors worked to warm Marin's core temperature while assessing her injuries. Atlas lay in the corner, permitted to stay by staff who recognized a service dog's dedication. His eyes never left his person, watching for any sign she might wake and reveal the truth about what had really happened on that mountain. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled Marin's room as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Atlas remained a constant presence, his chin resting on the edge of her bed whenever nurses weren't checking her vitals. Each time her eyes fluttered open, he whined softly, letting her know she wasn't alone. Down the hallway, Ember Lane sat in a vinyl hospital chair, carefully crafting her narrative. Her hands trembled just enough to be noticeable as she filled out the incident report for Agency Director Wallace Brent, who had rushed to the hospital after hearing about his client's suicide attempt. "Ms. Lane, please, take your time," Director Brent said, his tired eyes showing genuine concern. "This must be traumatic for you as well." Ember dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I just keep replaying it in my mind, the way she looked at me before she..." She let her voice trail off, shoulders shaking. "And then at the emergency room, when her dog attacked me." Director Brent straightened in his chair. "The dog attacked you? Why wasn't this reported immediately?" "I didn't want to make things worse," Ember explained, rolling up her sleeve to reveal fresh scratches. "When they brought her in, Atlas became aggressive. I was trying to help the medical team, but he lunged at me. I know he was just upset about his owner, but..." She looked down, the picture of reluctant concern. "It's not the first time he's shown aggression toward me." In Marin's room, Rowan paced near the window, his work boots scuffing against the linoleum. He'd been there for hours, watching Marin's bruised face, listening to her labored breathing. The doctors had treated her for hypothermia, set a broken wrist, and bandaged countless cuts and scrapes. But it was the fear in her eyes when she briefly regained consciousness that haunted him. She said, "Trying to kill me," Marin had whispered before slipping back under. A knock at the door made Atlas lift his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest as Director Brent entered, followed by Ember. "Mr. Pike," the director nodded. "I need to discuss some concerns about the dog." Rowan moved protectively closer to Atlas. "What concerns?" "Ms. Lane has reported multiple instances of aggressive behavior, culminating in an attack during the emergency room admission." Director Brent held up a stack of papers. "Given the circumstances, we need to remove the animal from the premises." "No." The word came weakly from the bed. Marin's eyes were open, glassy with medication but filled with panic. "Atlas stays." Ember stepped forward, her face a mask of compassion. "Marin, sweetie, I know you love him, but after what happened, you..." Marin struggled to form words through her dry throat. "You pushed..." "She's still very confused," Ember said quickly. "The trauma, the medications..." Director Brent nodded sympathetically. "Ms. Holt, we have your earlier statements about feeling like a burden. Ms. Lane has documented your declining mental state over the past weeks. We're here to help." "That's not true," Rowan interjected. "I see Marin almost every day. She's never expressed anything like that." "Mr. Pike," Ember's voice was gentle but firm, "your attachment to Marin is admirable, but it might be clouding your judgment. The signs were there." She pulled out a notebook, flipping to dated entries. March 15th, client expressed feelings of worthlessness. March 18th, client refused meals, stating she didn't deserve care. March 22nd. Rowan's face reddened. "Those are lies! Marin, tell them!" But Marin was fighting to stay conscious, the pain medication pulling her under again. Atlas pressed closer to her side, his ears flat against his head, as he watched Ember. Director Brent reviewed the documentation, his expression growing more concerned. "These notes are very detailed, Mr. Pike, and given the dog's recent aggressive behavior..." He sighed. "I'm sorry, but we'll need to remove him immediately. Hospital policy is clear about dangerous animals." "He's not dangerous," Rowan argued. "He's protected her for years. He's the reason she's alive." "He followed her scent, yes," Ember acknowledged. "But his behavior since then has been erratic, threatening. We can't risk him hurting anyone else." Marin's monitors beeped faster as she fought against the medication. "Please," she whispered. "Atlas. Need Atlas." A security guard appeared in the doorway, summoned by Director Brent's earlier call. "Sir," he addressed Rowan, "I need you to step aside." Rowan looked desperately between Marin and Atlas, knowing if he resisted too strongly, they might ban him from visiting altogether. Atlas stood his ground, hackles raised, until Marin weakly touched his head. "It's okay," she murmured, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Be good, Atlas. Be good." The retired search and rescue dog recognized a command when he heard one, even through his obvious distress. He allowed the security guard to attach a leash, though his eyes never left Marin's face. "We'll find him a suitable temporary home," Director Brent assured them, "until things settle down." As Atlas was led away, his nails scraping reluctantly on the floor, Marin turned her face to the wall. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Ember watched the scene unfold with perfectly crafted concern, but beneath it, satisfaction gleamed in her pale eyes. The system was working exactly as she'd planned, believing her documentation, trusting her professional demeanor, and slowly isolating Marin from her supports. Rowan stood helplessly by Marin's bed, his hands clenched into fists. "This isn't right," he said, but Director Brent was already leaving, his attention on his phone as he arranged Atlas's removal. "I'll take good care of her," Ember promised Rowan, her voice honeyed with false sincerity. "Why don't you go home and rest? You look exhausted." The message was clear. She was in charge now. The professionals were handling things. His presence was neither needed nor wanted. As Rowan reluctantly gathered his jacket, Ember began straightening Marin's blankets with efficient movements. Everything was proceeding according to plan. With Atlas gone and doubt cast on Rowan's objectivity, Marin's support system was crumbling. Soon she would be completely alone, exactly where Ember wanted her. The mountain night wrapped around Atlas like a familiar blanket. His paws moved silently across Rowan's backyard, guided by instinct and years of search and rescue training. The German shepherd's muscles tensed as he squeezed through the loose board in the fence. The one Rowan hadn't noticed needed fixing. 3 days had passed since they'd taken him from Marin. 3 days of pacing, whining, and watching Rowan's worried face. But tonight was different. Tonight, the scent that had bothered him since first meeting Ember Lane grew stronger, pulling him like an invisible leash. The streets of Kingsford were quiet at 2 in the morning. Atlas stuck to the shadows, his graying muzzle low to the ground as he followed the trail. Past the shuttered grocery store, around the corner from the library, down the winding road that led to the newer developments. Here, the houses stood farther apart, each with its own carefully maintained yard. Ember's house sat back from the road, its windows dark except for a small security light by the garage. Atlas circled the property once, twice, testing the air. No movement inside. His training kicked in. Assess, evaluate, proceed with caution. The storage shed caught his attention. It wasn't the building itself, but the smell seeping from beneath its door. That wrong smell, the one that made his hackles rise whenever Ember came near. Atlas nosed at the gap under the door, his sensitive nose picking up traces of something metallic and old. The door wasn't properly latched. A gentle push with his head, and it swung open with only the faintest creak. Inside, plastic storage bins lined the walls, neatly labeled and stacked. But Atlas ignored those, drawn to a large blue container partially hidden behind some gardening tools. His teeth found purchase on the lid's edge. Years of training exercises made the task simple. Lift, push, reveal. The smell hit him stronger now, making him sneeze. Buried beneath folded blankets and old newspapers lay a jacket, dark stains visible even in the dim light. Atlas's nose touched the fabric. Blood. Old blood, and something else. A sweet, chemical smell that reminded him of the hospital. But there was more. His nose brushed against something hard and plastic, catching in the jacket's pocket. A child's hair clip, broken in half, with tiny painted butterflies still visible on its surface. Without hesitation, Atlas grabbed the jacket in his teeth. This was evidence. He'd learned that word well during his service years. Evidence needed to go to authority. And in Kingsford, authority meant Sheriff Krause. The journey to the sheriff's house took longer, weighed down by his prize. But Atlas never slowed. The sky was beginning to lighten when he reached her front porch, dropping the jacket by her welcome mat. He sat down firmly, assuming the alert position that had earned him so many rewards during his working years. Minutes passed, then hours. The sun rose fully, painting the mountains gold. Atlas didn't move. Cars began passing on the street. A newspaper carrier gave him an odd look. Still, Atlas held his position. Finally, at 6:45 in the morning, Sheriff Delia Krause opened her front door, coffee mug in hand. She nearly dropped it when she saw Atlas. "What in the world?" She knelt slowly, recognizing him. "You're Marin's dog, the one they took away." Her eyes fell on the jacket. The bloodstains were obvious in the morning light, dark patches that had soaked deep into the fabric. The broken hair clip tumbled from the pocket as she lifted it. "Stay," she commanded Atlas, though she needn't have bothered. He wasn't going anywhere until she understood. Sheriff Krause disappeared inside with the jacket. Atlas heard her making phone calls, her voice growing increasingly urgent. Words like evidence and warrant drifted through the open window. By 8 o'clock, the sheriff's office was buzzing with activity. Deputies pulled files, made calls, and gathered around computer screens. Sheriff Krause stood at her desk, staring at a growing collection of documents. "How did we miss this?" she muttered, scanning employment records. 3 counties, 3 different agencies. Each time a patient death or accident within months of her arrival, all ruled accidental or natural causes. Her deputy looked up from his computer. "Got something from Portland. 5 years ago, a child in foster care, 8 years old, fell downstairs while in Ember Lane's care, died from injuries. Case closed as accidental." Sheriff Krause picked up the broken hair clip, its butterflies now faded and chipped. "Not anymore, it's not." At the hospital, Marin lay in her bed, staring out the window. The bruises from her fall had faded to yellow-green, but the emptiness in her chest where Atlas should be felt worse than any physical pain. A knock at her door made her turn. Rowan stood there, looking simultaneously worried and excited. "Marin, you need to hear this. Atlas got out last night." Her heart clenched. "Is he okay?" "More than okay." Rowan moved closer, lowering his voice. "He found something at Ember's house, brought it to Sheriff Krause. They're reopening your accident case, and others too." Marin's hand flew to her mouth. "Others?" "There's a pattern, going back years." Rowan touched her arm gently. "The sheriff wants to talk to you again, about the day of your accident. She says they found physical evidence that might match what happened to you." The words triggered something in Marin's mind, a flash of memory, the sweet smell of cleaning chemicals, a jacket, dark blue against the mountain sky, hands pushing her wheelchair toward the edge. But before that. "The stairs," she whispered, the memory suddenly crystal clear. 3 years ago, before the wheelchair, I was at home. Ember. She was working for the home health agency then, too. Different name, different hair, but her eyes. She came to help me after my surgery. And then... Rowan gripped her hand as the memories flooded back. "She pushed you down the stairs?" Marin nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I hit my head. When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't remember her face, couldn't remember anything clearly. They said the confusion was from the trauma. But it was her. It was always her." Outside the hospital room, Sheriff Krause stood quietly, her notebook open. Every word, every detail would matter for the case they were building. And it had all started because a retired search and rescue dog refused to ignore his training or abandon his person. Back on the sheriff's porch, Atlas remained at his post. He would stay until they understood, until Marin was safe, until justice was served. It's what he was trained to do, and more importantly, it's what he promised in his heart the day Marin rescued him from retirement, to protect her no matter what. Sheriff Delia Krause's office buzzed with focused intensity as her team worked through the growing pile of evidence. The normally organized space had transformed into a war room, with papers covering every surface and photos taped to the walls. She stood before the evidence board, connecting red strings between locations and dates. "Cross-reference everything," she ordered her deputies. "I want every detail about Ember Lane's movements for the past 10 years. Deputy Martinez looked up from his computer. "Sheriff, I've got something. 7 years ago, Cedar Grove Nursing Home. 3 unexplained deaths in 4 months, all during her shifts." Krause added another red pin to the map. "What happened?" "She transferred out before any investigation. Changed her name slightly. Emma Lane instead of Ember. Same pattern in Riverside County and Mountain View Care Center." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "How many victims total?" "We're at 12 confirmed suspicious deaths or accidents, all ruled natural causes or accidents at the time." Martinez shook his head. "She's good at covering her tracks." "No one's that good," Krause muttered, studying the timeline. "Everyone makes mistakes." Across town, Rowan Pike sat in his mechanic's shop, surrounded by his own investigation materials. His laptop showed multiple tabs of newspaper archives and missing persons reports. Atlas lay at his feet, watching intently. "I remember this case, boy," Rowan said softly, clicking through old articles. "The missing kid you tracked 3 years ago. Sarah Mitchell, age 6. He pulled up a photo of a smiling little girl with butterfly clips in her hair, identical to the broken one Atlas had found. Atlas's ears perked up at the image. Rowan leaned forward, reading faster. "Sarah disappeared while in the care of her babysitter, Emma Lane." He grabbed his phone, dialing the sheriff's number with shaking hands. At the agency office, Director Wallace Brent sat at his desk, sweat beading on his forehead as Ember Lane stood before him. Her pristine appearance and calm demeanor somehow made her presence more threatening. "Those records need to disappear," she said softly. "We wouldn't want anyone questioning your oversight, would we? All those background checks you failed to verify properly." Brent tugged at his collar. "That's illegal. I could lose my license." "You'll lose more than that if this investigation continues." Ember's smile never reached her eyes. "I know about the medication errors you covered up last year, the funding discrepancies. Would be a shame if those came to light." In her hospital room, Marin worked with renewed determination. Her laptop balanced on the bedside table as she helped Rowan research, coordinating through video chat. Atlas's discovery had energized her. "The timeline matches," she told Rowan, scanning employment records. "She was working as a private nurse in Portland when Sarah disappeared. Then she moved here, changed her name slightly, and started at the agency." Rowan's face on the screen looked grim. "Sheriff Krause is building the case, but Ember's already started covering her tracks. The agency's records are being altered." "She's got something on Director Brent," Marin realized. "That's why he always looked so nervous around her." At the sheriff's office, Krause spread out the latest evidence. "We've got 13 suspicious deaths, 8 serious injuries resulting in permanent disability, and 3 missing children over 9 years. Different names, different cities, but always the same MO." Her team gathered around as she continued. "She targets the vulnerable, elderly patients, disabled individuals, children, gains their trust or the trust of their caregivers, then orchestrates accidents that look natural. The few survivors, like Marin, are left with trauma-induced memory loss. "Why hasn't anyone connected the dots before?" Deputy Martinez asked. "Because she's careful, changes names slightly, moves between jurisdictions. Plus, she's got a network of compromised administrators covering for her." Kraus picked up the broken butterfly clip. But this time, she didn't count on a retired search and rescue dog who remembered her scent from an old case. In her apartment, Ember methodically packed a go bag while deleting files from her laptop. Her movements were precise, practiced. She'd done this before. But this time felt different. This time she'd underestimated her opponents. Her phone buzzed. Director Brent. "The records are gone," he said, voice trembling. "But the sheriff's office just called. They're executing a search warrant tomorrow morning." "That's not my concern anymore," Ember replied coolly, zipping her bag. "Remember our agreement, Wallace? One word about me, and those reports go public." Back at the hospital, Marin, Rowan, and Sheriff Kraus held an urgent conference. Atlas lay protectively across Marin's feet, refusing to leave despite hospital regulations. "We've got enough for multiple warrants," Kraus explained. "But we need to move fast. She's already started destroying evidence." "What about Sarah?" Rowan asked. "The missing girl Atlas tracked?" Kraus's expression darkened. "We're reopening that case too. The original search focused on the wrong areas. If Atlas recognized her scent after all this time—" "He never forgets a scent," Marin said, scratching Atlas's ears. "Especially not one from a case he couldn't solve." "We'll need him," Kraus admitted. "His testimony about finding the jacket won't hold up in court, but his tracking abilities are still certified. If we can get him reinstated—" "Done," Rowan said firmly. "I've already called his former handler. The paperwork's being processed." They worked late into the night, building their case. Marin mapped out patterns in Ember's movements. Rowan dug deeper into employment records. Sheriff Kraus coordinated with other jurisdictions. And Atlas kept watch, his dark eyes alert for any threat to his people. The evidence board in Kraus's office grew more complex. Red strings connected cities, dates, victims. The pattern was undeniable now, a decade-long trail of devastation hidden behind perfect references and falsified records. Ember Lane had been hiding in plain sight, protected by a system too overworked to notice the darkness behind her smile. But that protection was crumbling. With each new discovery, each confirmed connection, her carefully constructed facade weakened. The truth was emerging, brought to light by an unlikely alliance. A determined sheriff, a loyal mechanic, a resilient survivor, and a dog who never forgot his duty to protect and serve. What they didn't know was that Ember was already 3 steps ahead, implementing a plan she'd refined through years of close calls. She had always been good at disappearing, at becoming someone new. But this time, she wouldn't leave without ensuring her secrets stayed buried, along with anyone who threatened to expose them. The clock ticked toward midnight as the team worked, racing against time and a predator who had evaded justice for far too long. Atlas kept his vigil, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, a killer was preparing her next move. His training told him to stay alert, to protect his people. And that's exactly what he intended to do, no matter the cost. The rehabilitation center's night shift brought a different kind of quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as nurses made their rounds, shoes squeaking against polished floors. In room 212, Marin dozed fitfully, the gentle whir of her ventilator marking steady breaths after her injuries from the ravine. Atlas paced restlessly outside the building, confined to the courtyard by hospital regulations despite Rowan's protests. His ears twitched at every sound, body tense with the instinct that something wasn't right. The German Shepherd's training told him to stay alert, especially during the vulnerable night hours. Through the glass doors, He watched the night nurse make her usual 10 o'clock rounds. But something caught his attention. A familiar scent that made his hackles rise. A scent he'd come to associate with danger. Inside, Maren stirred in her hospital bed, awareness creeping in through medication-induced drowsiness. The room felt different, though she couldn't immediately place why. The ventilator's rhythm seemed slightly off, its usual steady hum altered. "Need to adjust your settings," came a soft voice, "for your comfort." Maren's eyes flew open. Ember stood beside her bed, fingers moving across the ventilator's control panel. Her pale eyes held that same eerily calm expression she'd worn at the ravine. "You are quite resilient," Ember continued, her tone almost admiring. "Most people don't survive the first time. But then, you've always been stubborn about dying, haven't you?" Panic surged through Maren's body as she realized the ventilator's assistance was decreasing. Each breath became more labored. She tried to reach for the call button, but her arms felt leaden, uncoordinated. "Don't worry," Ember soothed, producing a syringe. "I gave you something to help you relax. Can't have you fighting like last time. This way will be much gentler. Just drift off to sleep. Everyone will assume your injuries were simply too severe." Outside, Atlas's whine turned to a low growl. The scent of danger grew stronger, mixing with Maren's fear scent that he knew too well. He could hear the change in her breathing pattern through the thin walls. Ember began disconnecting monitoring equipment with practiced efficiency. "We'll take a little walk first. The security cameras on the east exit are down for maintenance. Such convenient timing." She wheeled a chair next to the bed, movements fluid and precise. This wasn't her first time executing such a plan. "The lake behind the facility is quite deep. By morning, they'll find your wheelchair at the edge. Another tragic accident." Maren struggled to speak, to scream, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. The medication left her helpless as Ember began transferring her to the wheelchair. The ventilator's portable unit provided minimal support now, each breath a battle. Atlas's growl deepened. Through the courtyard windows, he saw Ember's silhouette moving Maren toward the hallway. Training and instinct merged into a single imperative. Protect. Without hesitation, he charged the glass side door. The impact was explosive. Safety glass shattered in a crystalline cascade as 100 pounds of determined German Shepherd burst through. Alarms blared immediately, their shrill warning echoing through the corridors. Ember's composure cracked. She shoved Maren's wheelchair aside, sending it crashing into the wall as she bolted toward the stairwell. Atlas bounded after her, but stopped at Maren's side as she slumped in the chair, struggling for air. Security personnel thundered down the hallway, responding to the alarms. Medical staff rushed to restore Maren's ventilator settings and proper monitoring. Through it all, Atlas stood guard, his fur still bristling, eyes fixed on the stairwell where Ember had disappeared. "Code Gray, East Wing," crackled over the intercom. "Security breach, all personnel respond." Rowan arrived minutes later, having been sleeping in his truck in the parking lot. He found Maren surrounded by medical staff, Atlas refusing to leave her side despite orderlies trying to remove him. The dog's paws were bleeding from the glass, but he remained focused solely on his charge. "She was here," Maren managed to whisper once her breathing stabilized. "She tried to—" "Atlas saved." Her voice broke. Rowan pulled out his phone, dialing Sheriff Krause. "We need officers at the rehab center, now." Ember made another attempt. Security footage would later show Ember slipping out through a service entrance, her composure restored, except for a slight tremor in her hands. But she'd left something behind this time. Proof. The syringe was recovered, bearing her fingerprints. The ventilator's tampered settings were documented. Most importantly, multiple witnesses had seen her flee. Her mask of professional caring had finally cracked completely. There would be no explaining this away as a misunderstanding or patient confusion. The attack proved what Marin had been trying to tell everyone. She was in immediate danger from someone who wouldn't stop until she succeeded. Sheriff Krause arrived with a full team, cordoning off the area as a crime scene. As she interviewed staff and reviewed security footage, her expression grew grimmer. "She's escalating," she told Rowan. "Getting desperate. That makes her more dangerous." Marin refused to be moved to a different facility, knowing Ember could likely find her anywhere. Instead, security was doubled, and Atlas was finally granted official permission to stay in her room. The dog settled into a corner with a clear view of both the door and window, his alert posture showing he understood the gravity of his duty. That night marked a turning point. Ember's carefully constructed facade had shattered like the glass door, revealing the predator beneath. Her desperation had driven her to take risks, to act openly instead of through carefully orchestrated accidents. But in doing so, she'd finally given them what they needed: undeniable proof of her true nature. In the following days, as Marin continued her recovery with Atlas constantly by her side, the hospital staff marveled at the dog's dedication. His injured paws had been treated, but he refused to leave his post even to rest. He'd already failed to protect Marin once at the ravine. He wouldn't fail again. The security footage of Atlas's dramatic entrance became key evidence. It showed not just a pet's devotion, but a trained service dog responding to a genuine threat. His behavior validated Marin's claims about Ember's previous attack, lending credibility to her entire story. The dog's instincts, honed by years of search and rescue work, had not only saved Marin's life, but had finally begun to expose the truth. The autumn air bit cold and sharp as Atlas led them down the overgrown path near the river. His nose worked the ground methodically, tracking a scent only he could detect. Sheriff Krause followed close, behind with 2 deputies, their boots crunching on frost-covered leaves. Rowan pushed Marin's wheelchair carefully over the uneven terrain, having insisted on bringing her despite the difficult access. "He's got something," Marin said softly, recognizing Atlas's change in posture. The German shepherd's movements became more focused, his tail straight and still, the same stance he'd shown when finding her in the ravine. They approached a derelict cabin, its wooden walls gray with age and decay. According to county records, this had been one of Ember's first postings as a live-in caregiver, back when she used a different name. The elderly client had died here, another accident that hadn't raised suspicions at the time. Atlas circled the property's perimeter, then stopped abruptly near an old tool shed. He began pawing at the ground, whining with increasing urgency. Sheriff Krause nodded to her deputies, who brought over shovels and evidence collection gear. "Mark the perimeter," she instructed, pulling on latex gloves. "Document everything exactly as we find it." The deputies began digging where Atlas indicated. The soil was dark and loose, unlike the hard-packed earth surrounding it. After 3 feet, one of the shovels struck something solid. "Hold up," Sheriff Krause called out. She knelt by the hole, using smaller tools to carefully clear away more dirt. A piece of metal glinted in the weak autumn sunlight, curved, twisted aluminum tubing. Marin's breath caught. That's the same type of chair I had, before." Rowan squeezed her shoulder as the deputies continued their careful excavation. More items emerged. A child's backpack, decomposed but still recognizable. A broken walking cane. Personal effects that told silent stories of lives interrupted. "These weren't random victims," Sheriff Krause said grimly. "She targeted people with physical vulnerabilities, made their deaths look like accidents or natural progression of their conditions." Atlas stayed close to the dig site, occasionally pawing at specific spots that yielded more evidence. His training in finding missing persons had made him uniquely suited for this grim task. Each item was photographed, logged, and carefully bagged for forensic analysis. As the morning wore on, Marin stared at the twisted wheelchair metal, memories flooding back. 3 years ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I was training for a marathon. I remember seeing someone on the trail that day just before my accident. Someone who looked concerned about my safety. Rowan's hands tightened on her wheelchair handles. Ember? Marin nodded slowly. She was using a different hair color then, but that same too-perfect smile. She warned me about a dangerous section ahead, said she'd seen other runners have trouble there. Her voice grew stronger as the memories crystallized. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but later when I was running that section... The ground gave way, Rowan finished. They said it was natural erosion. She'd weakened it deliberately, Sheriff Krause concluded, probably over several days, waited for the right victim, someone athletic, independent, someone whose sudden disability would require long-term care. Atlas whined softly and pressed against Marin's leg. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. She planned it all, waited 3 years, then got herself assigned as my caregiver to finish what she started. One of the deputies called out from the hole. They'd found more: medical ID bracelets, pieces of mobility equipment, personal items that would help identify other victims. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of Ember's methodology. She chose people who were either already vulnerable or whom she could make vulnerable, Sheriff Krause explained, examining a tarnished medical alert necklace. Then she'd position herself as their caregiver, gain their trust, and wait for the right moment. When questions arose, she'd already established herself as a concerned, professional caretaker. Rowan paced the perimeter of the excavation, his face dark with anger. How many others? Based on what we're finding here, and the employment records we've traced. Sheriff Krause shook her head. At least 7 confirmed victims over the past decade. Probably more we haven't connected yet. Atlas suddenly barked, drawing their attention to a new spot several feet from the main dig. The deputies quickly began working there, soon uncovering a collection of ID cards and driver's licenses, Ember's discarded aliases. She kept trophies, Marin realized, feeling sick, not just from her victims, but from each identity she used to get close to them. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the grim scene. More law enforcement vehicles arrived, including a mobile crime scene unit. The quiet riverside property transformed into a hub of investigative activity. Through it all, Atlas maintained his vigil, moving between the dig sites and Marin's side. His earlier instincts about Ember had been right all along. Now his training was helping bring truth to light, turning the tables on the predator who had haunted Marine's life. We'll need to cross-reference everything we find with missing persons cases and suspicious deaths across 3 states, Sheriff Krause told her deputies. Focus on cases involving disabled or injured victims, especially where a caregiver was present. Marin watched the methodical collection of evidence, each item representing a life Ember had targeted. The twisted wheelchair metal seemed to mock her, proof that she'd been marked for death years before she even knew Ember existed. The marathon training, the careful way Ember had staged the trail accident, the long wait before appearing as her caregiver. It had all been calculated. She's thorough, Sheriff Krause observed. Patient. She takes time to set up each incident, establishes alibis, builds her caring reputation. That's why she's gotten away with it for so long. But she got sloppy with me, Marin said. Because of Atlas. He saw through her act from the beginning, made her rush her plans. Rowan nodded. And now we have proof that connects her to multiple victims. Physical evidence she can't explain away. The morning wore on as the team continued their grim work. Atlas led them to several more locations around the property, each yielding more evidence of Ember's crimes. The pieces were finally coming together, not just for Marin's case, but for all the victims who had come before. The twisted wheelchair metal was carefully packed away with the other evidence, but its image stayed burned in Marin's mind. She hadn't just survived Ember's attack by chance. She'd disrupted a pattern, a carefully crafted methodology that had claimed multiple lives. And with Atlas's help, she was now in position to stop it for good. The discovery at the river property exploded across the local news within hours. Sheriff Krause's deputies established a wide perimeter while forensics teams processed the growing collection of evidence. But Ember Lane had already vanished, leaving behind only echoes of her carefully constructed lies. Marin watched the coverage from her living room, Atlas alert at her side. The morning news showed officers carrying tagged evidence bags from the riverside scene. She turned up the volume as Sheriff Krause addressed reporters. "We are seeking information on the whereabouts of Ember Lane, a person of interest in multiple suspicious deaths across 3 states. She should be considered extremely dangerous." The sheriff's voice cut off as Rowan muted the TV. "You should try to rest," he said gently, setting a cup of tea beside Marin's chair. "You've been through enough." "I can't rest," Marin replied, her fingers absently stroking Atlas's fur. "Not while she's out there. She'll find another target, create a new identity, start over somewhere else." Before Rowan could respond, Marin's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Sheriff Krause. She answered on speaker. "Ember's made her move," the sheriff said without preamble. "She took Wallace Brent, the agency director, at gunpoint about 20 minutes ago. His assistant found his office ransacked, and security footage shows them leaving in his car." Marin's heart hammered. "She's desperate." "And more dangerous than ever," Krause agreed. "We've got roadblocks up, but she knows these mountain roads, and now she has access to agency files, client information, everything she needs to disappear and start over." Atlas raised his head suddenly, ears forward. Seconds later, they heard police sirens racing past on the main road. "She's using him for resources," Marin realized. "Money, transportation, and a human shield." "We found evidence she'd been planning to run," Sheriff Krause continued. "Hidden accounts, fake IDs, but the discovery at the river forced her hand. Now she's improvising." Rowan leaned closer to the phone. "What do you need from us?" "I need Marin's insight. You knew her routine, her habits, and more importantly, you survived her. Twice. If anyone can help us predict her next move, it's you." Marin exchanged looks with Rowan. His expression was concerned but supportive. He wouldn't try to stop her if she wanted to help. "I want to be involved," Marin said firmly. "Not just consulting by phone. I need to be part of this." There was a pause on the other end. "It could be dangerous," the sheriff warned. "I'm already in danger as long as she's free, and I need—" Marin took a steadying breath. "I need to see this through, for closure, for all her victims." After another moment of silence, Sheriff Krause agreed. "Meet me at the station in 30 minutes. We're setting up a command center." The sheriff's office was a hub of controlled chaos when they arrived. Deputies coordinated with state police, while dispatchers relayed updates from the field. A large map dominated one wall, marked with possible escape routes and suspected hideouts. Sheriff Krause met them in her office, where stacks of agency files covered every surface. "Brent's assistant has been helping us go through everything," she explained. "Employment records, client histories, property listings connected to past cases." "Looking for patterns?" Rowan asked. "And connections we missed before. Ember's thorough. She plans escape routes and safe houses well in advance. There has to be something in here that points to where she's going." Atlas padded around the office, sniffing at boxes of files. Marin watched him, remembering how his instincts had been right about Ember from the start. She likes high ground, Marin said suddenly. Places with good visibility but limited access. The trail where she first paralyzed me, the ravine where she pushed me, even that river property. They're all spots where she could control the situation. Sheriff Krause pulled out a topographical map. We've been focusing on main roads, but you're right. She knows these mountains. What else? She's patient, Marin continued. She'll hole up somewhere until the initial search dies down. Somewhere isolated but not obvious. Somewhere with resources. Atlas barked once, sharp and decisive. He'd stopped by a box of property records, his tail wagging slowly. Rowan began sorting through the files. Here, seasonal rentals and vacation properties managed by the agency, places where clients needed temporary care while recovering. Sheriff Krause spread the documents across her desk. Cross-reference these with elevation and isolation factors. There, Marin pointed. The Morrison Overlook cabin. It's perfect. Remote access road, clear view of approaching vehicles, backup generator, stored supplies for winter emergencies. And it's been empty since the owner died last spring, Sheriff Krause added, checking the file. No new rental. Contract filed. She grabbed her radio, issuing rapid orders to redirect search teams. Within minutes, the office transformed into a tactical planning center. State police SWAT commanders arrived to coordinate with local deputies. I'm going with you, Marin stated as preparations continued around them. Absolutely not, Rowan protested. It's too dangerous. She's right, Sheriff Krause interrupted. We need her. Ember's cornered and holding a hostage. Having someone who understands her psychology could make the difference. Then I'm staying with her, Rowan said firmly. His hand found Marin's shoulder, warm and steadying. Atlas pressed against Marin's legs, a low growl building in his throat. His search and rescue training would be valuable, but more importantly, he was her partner in this fight. Together they had already survived Ember's worst. Now they would help end her reign of terror. The convoy assembled quickly, SWAT vehicles, sheriff's deputies, and tactical medics. Marin rode with Sheriff Krause, Atlas, and Rowan beside her as they wound up the mountain roads. The Overlook cabin was nearly 40 minutes out, accessible only by a narrow service road. We'll stage just below the ridgeline, Sheriff Krause explained. Tactical teams will move in on foot to establish containment. If she's there, we don't want to spook her into harming the hostage. Marin nodded, her heart racing as the elevation increased. Through the trees, she caught glimpses of the valley below, painted in late afternoon shadows. Somewhere ahead, Ember was running out of options. The careful predator was now prey herself, backed into a corner of her own making. They pulled into a small turnaround area, engines cutting off simultaneously. SWAT teams deployed silently into the surrounding forest, while Sheriff Krause established a command post. Through binoculars, Marin could just make out the cabin's roof above the tree line. Atlas's ears pricked forward. A moment later, they all heard it, the distant sound of a car engine straining up the steep grade. That's them, Sheriff Krause whispered into her radio. All units hold position. Let them pass the containment line. Rowan's hand found Marin's again as they waited in tense silence. The engine sound grew closer, then stopped. Car doors opened and closed. Through the binoculars, Marin watched two figures emerge. Ember, still eerily composed despite everything, and Wallace Brent, his hands bound and his face pale with fear. The endgame was about to begin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Overlook cabin's weathered exterior as Rowan guided their vehicle up the final stretch. Marin's wheelchair was secured beside him, Atlas alert and focused in the back seat. The aging deck that extended over the quarry's edge creaked in the mountain wind, a sound that made Marin's skin crawl. Something's wrong, Marin whispered. Wallace's car is here, but I don't see any movement inside. Rowan killed, the engine scanning the property. Stay here while I... The driver's side window exploded inward. Ember appeared like a ghost, her pale eyes wild as she pressed a gun to Rowan's temple. "Both of you, out, now." Atlas growled deep in his throat, but Marin signaled him to stay calm. With practiced efficiency, she transferred herself to her chair while Rowan slowly exited with his hands raised. "Toward the deck," Ember ordered, using Rowan as a shield. "Your dog stays back or I pull the trigger." The old boards groaned under Marin's wheels as Ember forced them forward. Behind them, Atlas tracked their movement, muscles coiled and ready. "You just couldn't let it go," Ember's voice carried an edge of mania now. "Couldn't accept your place in the natural order. The weak, the broken, you're all just burdens. I was doing society a favor." "Where's Wallace?" Marin demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Unconscious in the trunk. He served his purpose." Ember's laugh held no warmth. "Like you served yours 3 years ago. But you survived. My one loose end." They reached the deck's far edge. Below, the quarry depths seemed to swallow what remained of the daylight. The old support beams creaked ominously. "You're insane," Rowan growled. "I'm efficient," Ember corrected. "Resources are wasted on the helpless. They drain families, drain systems, drain hope. I just speed up the inevitable." She shoved Rowan hard, making him stumble. In that split second, Atlas launched himself forward, a blur of fur and focused rage. His powerful jaws clamped onto Ember's arm as she raised the gun. The impact spun her sideways, the weapon flying into the undergrowth. The deck's ancient boards splintered under the sudden violence. Rowan lost his footing as a section gave way. He grabbed the railing, but it too began to tear free. "Rowan!" Marin lunged forward, her chair's wheels locking at the deck's edge. She caught his wrist as he fell, her upper body strength, honed by years of adaptation, the only thing between him and the abyss. Ember screamed as she slid toward the gap, but Atlas held firm, his teeth anchored in her sleeve. The three of them hung suspended in a grotesque chain, Marin gripping Rowan, who had instinctively grabbed Ember's free hand, while Atlas's bite on her sleeve prevented a complete fall. The deck continued to splinter and crack. Marin's shoulders burned with effort, but she refused to let go. Above them, Atlas's claws dug deep into the remaining boards, his powerful body becoming their literal lifeline. "Help us up," Rowan yelled to Ember. "We can all survive this." But Ember's face contorted with hate. "I'd rather die than go to prison." She began thrashing, trying to break free of both Rowan's grip and Atlas's hold. The sleeve fabric started to tear. Atlas adjusted his bite, moving higher up her arm, but each movement sent fresh tremors through the failing structure. Marin could feel her wheelchair starting to slide forward, inch by inch as the deck deteriorated beneath them. Shouts came from behind, rescue teams finally reaching their position. But would help arrive in time? The wooden supports screamed in protest as more sections began to give way. They hung there, lives balanced on splinters and strength, while Ember continued to fight against the very people trying to save her. Atlas held steady, his training and loyalty creating the thin margin between survival and tragedy. "Hold on!" A sharp voice cut through the chaos. Sheriff Krause and her deputies emerged from the tree line, moving with careful precision across what remained of the deck's entrance. "The structure's compromising fast," one deputy called out. "We need to work quickly." Two rescue workers secured safety lines while others carefully distributed their weight. The old wood continued to groan and splinter, but their practiced movements kept the deck from completely giving way. "We've got you," Sheriff Krause called down. She and a deputy reached for Rowan first, their strong arms forming a human chain. With careful coordination, they pulled him up to solid ground. He immediately turned to help, reaching back for Marin. "Easy now," he urged, his hands steady as they lifted her from her precariously balanced wheelchair. The relief in his eyes matched the trembling in her arms as she was brought to safety. Atlas maintained his grip on Ember, even as she continued to twist and fight. The rescue team worked around the determined dog, securing a harness around Ember's thrashing form. Only when she was fully supported did Atlas release his hold, allowing them to pull her up. "Ember Lane," Sheriff Krause's voice carried the weight of justice as deputies immediately cuffed the struggling woman. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and kidnapping." Ember's composure finally cracked. Her pale eyes darted wildly as the magnitude of her situation sank in. "They were burdens, all of them. I was helping." "Tell that to the judge," Sheriff Krause replied coldly. As deputies led Ember away, the sheriff turned to Marin. "We found Director Wallace. He's shaken but alive. Paramedics are treating him now." Marin nodded, her hand finding Atlas's fur. The German shepherd pressed against her leg, his mission complete. Rowan knelt beside them, wrapping an arm around Marin's shoulders as the adrenaline began to fade. "The evidence is overwhelming," Sheriff Krause continued. "The remains at the river property, the blood evidence on the jacket, your testimony, and now this attempted murder with multiple witnesses. She's not getting away this time." More officers arrived, documenting the scene. One brought Marin's wheelchair, now safely back from the deck's edge. "Your dog's quite the hero," the officer commented. "We've never had a canine witness quite like him." Atlas sat straighter, his graying muzzle held high as if he understood. This had been more than just a rescue for him. It was the culmination of his training, his instincts, and his devotion to Marin. "The forensics team has matched items from the river site to 3 cold cases already," Sheriff Krause explained, "including pieces of your original wheelchair, Marin. She's been at this for years." Marin took a deep breath, her first in what felt like ages that wasn't tainted by fear. "It's really over?" "It's over," Rowan confirmed, squeezing her shoulder. "You're safe now, both of you." He scratched Atlas behind the ears, earning a contented sigh from the dog. They watched as Ember was placed in a patrol car, her perfect facade completely shattered. The woman who had terrorized so many vulnerable victims would face justice at last. Atlas had not only saved lives today, he had helped solve countless mysterious deaths that had haunted families for years. Emergency vehicles' lights painted the darkening sky in red and blue as the scene was processed. Marin leaned against Rowan, one hand still buried in Atlas's fur, anchoring herself in the present. The nightmare that had begun 3 years ago with her accident was finally ending. "Ready to go home?" Rowan asked softly. Marin nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. For the first time in years, home meant safety instead of fear. As Rowan helped her into his truck, Atlas took his usual spot in the back, alert but relaxed. They had all survived. They had won. Behind them, the old deck creaked one final time before collapsing completely into the quarry depths, taking with it the last traces of Ember's reign of terror. In the days following Ember's arrest, the investigation moved with unprecedented speed. The evidence was overwhelming, and agencies across 3 counties coordinated to build an airtight case. Sheriff Krause's office buzzed with activity as files were consolidated and victims' families were notified. "We've confirmed 7 deaths linked to her employment history," Sheriff Krause explained during a press conference on the courthouse steps. Without the remarkable actions of Atlas, a retired search and rescue dog, these crimes might have remained unsolved. His tracking abilities led us to crucial evidence that broke this case wide open. The media coverage was intense. Local papers ran headlines about the guardian German shepherd who had exposed a serial predator. Atlas took it all in stride, remaining faithfully by Marin's side as she prepared for the upcoming trial. Agency Director Wallace Brent, still shaken from his ordeal as Ember's hostage, provided investigators with full access to personnel files. "I should have seen the warning signs," he admitted during his statement. "She manipulated our entire system. We're implementing new screening protocols immediately." Rowan drove Marin to meetings with the district attorney, waiting patiently through each session. "You're not alone in this," he reminded her, his quiet support unwavering. "We'll see it through together." The town of Kingsford struggled to process the revelations. Neighbors who had once praised Ember's dedication now recoiled at memories of her presence in their homes. Support groups formed for families of suspected victims, creating a network of shared grief and healing. "The evidence is conclusive," the district attorney announced. "Ember Lane will face multiple counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and elder abuse. We're confident in our case." For Marin, each new development reinforced what she had known in her heart since that first uneasy meeting. Her instincts, and Atlas's, had been right all along. The world finally saw Ember's true nature, and justice was in motion at last. The courtroom fell silent as Marin wheeled herself to the witness stand. Her copper-brown hair was neatly tied back, her posture straight and determined. As she raised her right hand to take the oath, Atlas sat alertly beside Rowan in the gallery, his gray muzzle held high. "Ms. Holt," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your first encounter with Ember Lane." Marin's voice, once timid, rang clear and steady. She described the subtle manipulation, the growing isolation, and the terrifying moment on the mountain road. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of calculated predation, masked by professional care. "I'm not just a survivor," she concluded, meeting Ember's cold stare. "I'm here to make sure no one else becomes a victim." The impact of her testimony rippled through the community. Sheriff Krause approached her afterward with an unexpected proposal. "Your experience, combined with Atlas's abilities, could help others," the sheriff explained in her office, where photographs of K-9 graduates lined the walls. "We're starting a program to train retired service dogs to protect vulnerable individuals. Would you consider being our program advisor?" Marin's eyes lit up. "Atlas and I would be honored," she replied, reaching down to scratch behind her companion's ears. The German shepherd's tail wagged as official papers were signed, reinstating him as an active working dog with a new mission. The program quickly took shape. Twice a week, Marin worked with Sheriff Krause, evaluating retired service dogs and matching them with people who needed protection. Each success story helped heal another piece of her heart. "You're different now," Rowan observed one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Stronger, but you always were. You just see it now." Marin smiled, reaching for his hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, comfortable in the growing intimacy between them. "I stopped seeing myself as helpless," she explained. "That chair doesn't define me anymore. What happened with Ember showed me how much power I really have." Atlas dozed at their feet, his new service vest draped over a nearby chair. The tag gleamed. "Active duty, K-9 protection program." His legacy would live on through the dogs he helped train, creating a network of guardians for those who needed them most. The transformation from victim to survivor wasn't marked by any single moment. It grew in small victories, in confident testimony given, in lives touched through the K-9 program, in the gentle understanding that bloomed between Marin and Rowan. She had reclaimed not just her voice, but her purpose. The mountain air carried a crisp autumn scent as Marin's wheelchair rolled to a stop at the ravine's edge. Atlas pressed close to her side, his gray muzzle touching her hand, while Rowan stood quietly behind them both. The setting sun cast long shadows through the pine trees, so different from that dark day when Ember had brought her here. Marin reached into her pocket and withdrew the broken child's hair clip they'd found among the evidence. Its pink plastic surface was scratched and faded, a silent testimony to lives cut tragically short. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight, not just as an object, but as a symbol of all the pain Ember had caused. "I thought I needed to come back here," Marin said softly, her voice steady despite the memories. "Not to face my fears, but to remember my strength." Atlas's ears perked forward as water rushed below, the same stream that had nearly claimed Marin's life now flowing peaceful and clear. Rowan moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "Those children never got justice until now," Marin continued, rolling forward to the safety barrier that had been installed since her fall. "They deserved so much better than what she did to them." With deliberate care, she extended her hand over the barrier. The hair clip caught the fading sunlight as she opened her fingers, watching it fall. It disappeared into the flowing water below, not lost, but set free, like the heavy burden of trauma she'd carried for so long. Rowan's hand found hers then, warm and work-roughened, their fingers intertwined naturally, speaking volumes without words. This wasn't just comfort anymore. It was a promise, a future taking shape between them. Atlas pressed against Marin's legs, completing their circle of trust and protection. "I used to think surviving meant just staying alive," Marin said, looking up at Rowan. "But it's more than that. It's about living fully, helping others, loving without fear." He squeezed her hand gently. "You've shown me what real courage looks like," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Marin surveyed the ravine one last time, seeing it differently now. Where there had been terror, she found peace. Where there had been helplessness, she discovered strength. She adjusted her chair, turning it away from the edge under her own power. A simple act that meant everything. "Let's go home," she said, her voice clear and confident. Atlas fell into step beside her, his protective instincts never wavering. Rowan walked on her other side, their hands still joined, supporting without overshadowing her. Independence. As they made their way back to the car, Marin felt the last shadows of Ember's influence falling away. She was moving forward now, not as a victim but as a survivor, surrounded by love and ready to embrace whatever came next. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.